right, so picture this. You're at JFK's inauguration back in 1961. Big moment for American democracy,
It's a
right?
big moment. Yeah.
It all seems pretty straightforward, but there's a twist. Almost half, a staggering 47% of the political officers in U.S. embassies weren't diplomats at all.
Not at all.
They were CIA agents operating undercover what were known as Controlled American Sources, CAS.
CAS, yeah.
Doesn't that make you kind of rethink what diplomacy, actually looked like back then?
It really does. I mean, for you, the learner, it suggests this blurring of lines between, traditional diplomacy and these covert operations right at the core of U.S. foreign missions.
Yeah, and that's the kind of hidden world we're diving into today. We're going deep into some recently released documents, and they were previously top secret, and they're connected to the whole unveiling of the JFK assassination records.
Right, and we're focusing on the National Security Archive's analysis of these newly declassified materials, along with the official announcement from the National Archives about this huge information release.
So for you, the learner, our mission today is to really get a grip on what these documents reveal about the scale of the CIA's covert activities back when Kennedy was in office.
Right.
We want to, bring this shadowy side of the Cold War into focus.
Absolutely.
Without, getting bogged down in endless details.
Yeah, we don't want to overwhelm you.
No. We're looking for the key revelations, the ones that really change our understanding.
Right, those aha moments that help you understand what this all means.
Okay, so let's go back to that figure from Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s memo.
Right.
That 47%, that's huge.
Huge.
But the memo goes deeper. It names specific locations.
It does, yeah. Schlesinger points to the U.S. Embassy in Paris, where 123 individuals who seemed like diplomats were actually undercover CIA agents.
Yeah.
And in other key spots, the concentration was even higher.
Right, like in Chile, Schlesinger found that 11 out of 13 political officers at the embassy were actually CIA operatives in disguise.
Imagine that for you, the learner. Try to figure out the real political dynamics in a country where almost the entire political section of the U.S. Embassy is engaged in clandestine intelligence work.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It really highlights the importance placed on intelligence gathering and covert influence during the Cold War, especially in places considered crucial in the fight against communism.
Yeah, and the size of this whole network is just mind-boggling.
It is.
Schlesinger's report to Kennedy said that the CIA had almost as many personnel undercover overseas as the State Department itself.
Wow.
We're talking 3,900 for the CIA compared to 3,700 for state.
That's wild.
What does that near parity tell us about the thinking in Washington at the time?
It shows just how much emphasis they put on these clandestine activities. It wasn't some small side project. It was a fundamental part of how the U.S. conducted its foreign policy.
Right, and if you break down that CIA number, it gets even more complex.
Yeah.
About 1,500 of those agents were undercover as diplomats working for the State Department.
Right.
But that leaves another 2,200 likely operating under military or some other non-diplomatic cover.
That's a vast and multi-layered clandestine network spanning the globe. Think about that for you, the learner.
It's amazing.
It makes you wonder about coordination, where different parts of the U.S. government working at cross purposes abroad. And what about oversight? How do you control such a large and scattered intelligence operation?
Exactly. So how did all this information come to light? It wasn't a gradual leap or anything, was it?
No, it was a very deliberate event.
Yeah.
The National Archives officially announced this major document release on March 18, 2025.
And this wasn't just routine declassification, right? There was a specific reason behind it.
Absolutely. It happened under President Donald Trump's directive issued the day before on March 17, 2025. This directive was meant to release all the remaining classified records related to the JFK Assassination Records collection, following Executive Order 14176.
So after all these years, a big push to finally open up these secrets. And the sheer volume of what was released in a single day is almost hard to believe.
It's incredible. Over 63,000 pages of previously classified material were made public just on that one day.
Oh.
There were two main releases, one in the early evening with 32,000 pages, and another a few hours later with 31,400 pages.
To put that in perspective, that's about 11,123 PDF files in the first batch and another 1,059 in the second.
That's a lot.
Can you imagine for you, the learner, trying to wrap your head around all that? It's like trying to read a small library overnight.
It really gives you a sense of the massive amount of historical information that's been kept secret for decades.
So for anyone listening who wants to dig into these records themselves, how can they access them?
Well, the National Archives has made it pretty easy. You can access them directly online through their website, And you can also view them in person at their facility in College Park, Maryland. They have hard copies and analog media there.
So there are a few different ways to engage with this material depending on your research style and where you are.
Exactly. And they're also continuing to digitize everything, so even more will be accessible online eventually.
So it wasn't a completely unrestricted release, right? There were some limitations.
Right. The National Archives announcement does mention Sections 10 and 11 of the JFK Records Act.
Cool.
Section 10 usually deals with very sensitive information related to ongoing legal stuff like grand jury testimony. And Section 11 is about private tax info and materials donated to the government with certain restrictions.
I see.
These categories often have extra legal protections, so releasing them is more complicated and subject to specific legal requirements.
Yeah.
So while a huge amount has been declassified, there might still be some types of information that are protected for now.
That makes sense. Legal and privacy issues can be tricky. But even with those exceptions, this release seems like a major step towards transparency.
Absolutely. And this is where the analysis from the National Security Archive comes in. It's important to remember that their briefing published just the day after this document dump draws directly from these newly public National Archives documents. Their insights are based on these fresh revelations.
So they weren't just working with what was already known, they were digging into these brand new disclosures. What were some of their key takeaways? What really stood out?
Well, they emphasize that these unredacted papers are very revealing, unlike past releases where lots of stuff was blacked out.
Yeah.
These documents actually name specific agents, the countries they worked in, even details about spending. They outline top-secret clandestine operations, especially in Latin America and other key regions during the Cold War.
So we're talking about specific details that were kept secret for decades, suddenly open for examination. That must provide some amazing insights into how these covert actions were actually carried out.
It does. The National Security Archive even gives a concrete example. They mentioned a comparison of page from 1964 CIA History of Mexico City Station.
Yeah.
This lets researchers and the public actually see the kind of specific information names, dates, operational details that were once considered too sensitive to release and are now open for everyone to look at. It really shows this increased transparency.
It's amazing to see that before and after comparison. And the National Security Archive was pretty clear about how important this release is, wasn't it?
Yeah, they stated very directly that these revelations confirm CIA clandestine operations during this period were more extensive than previously known. This isn't just a small tweak to history. It suggests we've underestimated the true scale and scope of these activities during Kennedy's time.
That's a big deal. So stepping back for you, the learner, what does this newly revealed level of covert activity tell us about the Cold War and U.S. foreign policy under Kennedy? Why should these details matter to anyone trying to understand that period?
Well, understanding the true extent of these CIA operations provides crucial context for interpreting many events of the Cold War. It allows for a more nuanced analysis of U.S. foreign policy decisions, particularly in regions like Latin America, where these clandestine activities were most common. It raises big questions about the intended and unintended consequences of choosing covert action over overt diplomacy.
So basically, we need to factor these secret activities into our understanding of what was happening.
Exactly. Understanding this hidden history can help us develop a more complete and maybe even more critical perspective on the forces that shaped the world we live in today.
All right, so to sum it all up for you, the learner, what are the key takeaways from our deep dive into these documents and the initial analysis?
Basically, you now have a much clearer idea of the massive scale of CIA covert operations during the early 1960s, thanks to these newly declassified records.
Yeah.
The numbers are striking: the high percentage of undercover agents in U.S. embassies, the near equal number of personnel in the CIA and the State Department. All these figures reveal a hidden world operating alongside traditional diplomacy.
Yeah, it's like there was this whole parallel system of foreign relations happening in secret, one that most people, even those within the government, probably didn't fully grasp at the time.
Right, the level of secrecy surrounding these operations was clearly very high.
So as we wrap up, here's a final thought for you. Given the huge number of undercover agents working globally during this time, and the fact that these once secret records are now open for everyone to see, what might the long-term impact of this increased transparency be on how we understand crucial historical events and the ongoing role of intelligence agencies in a democratic society? What new questions does this deep dive raise for you about the balance between secrecy and the public's right to know? It's something worth thinking about.
Definitely a lot to ponder.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.
It's been fascinating.
Yeah. Until next time.
See you then.
All right. Bye.
Bye.